Anthony, where can people, if people have questions for you, wanna reach out, wanna contact you, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn. Any question, any comments, just like slide to my DM. That's how you say these days, right? Slide to my DM. I don't know if that applies to LinkedIn. God, I hope my partner is not going to listen to that podcast. That was terrible. Sorry.
We're going to keep that bit in. Ben, we've got our cold open for the episode. You can slide into Anthony's DMs in a professional manner.
Please.
On LinkedIn. Strictly professional. All right. Today, I'm joined by Anthony Fritsch, the Global Head of Sales Enablement at CoachHub. He has built out the enablement function a year ago at the team. And prior to his time at CoachHub, you spent, was it 8 years at Google?
Yeah, that's correct. 8 years.
8 years at Google on the Dublin campus. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Adam, and greetings from Berlin. Actually, we're like in the middle of a heat wave, so I hope I'm not going to melt by the end of that recording.
Are you doing okay over there? I think you may be our first official European guest too, so that is something you can put on the mantle too.
Well, definitely. I hope there's going to be many more, right?
I think this is the start. We had a session with a listener from Belgium who, hi Lynn, if you're listening, but we haven't had an official European guest just yet. So Anthony, for this episode, specifically what I really want to get into is how you've built or how you plan to build this culture of compete through enablement. I know you've been building out this enablement process at CoachHub, and that a lot of what you're applying today comes from what you've learned from your time also at Google. Let's do a little blast of the past, go back a couple years. What did their approach to enablement look like?
So, listen, I'm really, really happy to share a bit of what I want to call my wisdom. Hopefully it's wisdom. But before joining the global enablement team at Google, actually I spent a decade in sales. I studied my career in sales at Wrigley. I was at Danone. That was when I was back in France. And then I joined Google when I joined the large customer sales team supporting automotive clients. Like for me, it was just a natural progression to actually move to the global enablement team. Because I still really wanted to support sellers. And what the global enablement team, so it's the mastery team at Google, is doing very well is that all of the enablement programs, after a learner has completed them, like ready to apply, right? It's not that kind of enablement program was like, hey, yeah, that was great, but now what do I do with that knowledge? How do I apply it? An enablement program at Google was always a mix between, of course, product knowledge, because when you're in sales, you need to master your product knowledge. But on top of it, it was also a good blend of sales skills. So, for example, objection handling or different conversation guides. And on top of it, competitive intelligence, right? So that means when you actually mix all the three ingredients together, when you're a seller, and then you're back on the phone with your client, you can already apply it because everything has been put in context for you. And that's often what's missing in a lot of enablement or learning programs is that, yeah, the content is great, but it's not in context. So it's like almost impossible to apply, and it doesn't have the impact that it's supposed to have with the sellers.
What I like is there's like the applicability is like that's the kind of purpose for enablement,
Correct.
Right? Is for what you're teaching to be enabled. Like really is it's an element of teaching, right? Sometimes I've seen like you see like here's a competitive session at your QBR or sales kickoff, but it's its own thing. But what I'm hearing from you is it almost bleeds into all of the enablement practices that was going on at Google and what you're doing at CoachHub?
I think what's important here is probably to get back to what enablement is. And what I'm going to share might be something very personal, but the way I do see enablement and the way I'm building the enablement function at CoachHub is really about removing all the silos that we used to have, right? So it's like making sure that all of the teams supporting the sales team talk to each other and they don't build their own thing without looking at what the other team is doing. When we look specifically at competitive intelligence, a lot of time I've seen that competitive intel misses the mark when shared with sellers, because how do you apply it? If it is just like a repository of facts, like, oh, my competitor X like is 20% cheaper than me, but that's what they do and that's what they don't do. Like, how do you actually apply this? So the way we actually share back the intel that we collect with the sellers is that immediately we already structure it in a way that they will be able to leverage it when they are pitching. So where we win, where we lose, where are the weaknesses and the strengths of our competitors, but also we provide objection handlings and objections and how to handle those objections. So again, it's really around like the applicability and that you're able to leverage like that knowledge. Like just sharing knowledge, like this is only halfway, right? You need to go a step further. You know, a good enablement program is like not giving fish to your learner. It's like teaching them how to fish. So if your resources are well built and they know when to find that information, like this is actually like a game changer, right?
Do you remember something in particular? Like, what was the most memorable piece of the enablement sessions that would happen at Google? Is there something that you stuck with and you're like, when I move on in my career, I'm taking this specifically into whatever I'm teaching through enablement in my future?
Well, and that's obviously Rome wasn't built in one day, but the mastery team at Google has such a strong brand. Like everyone internally knows it. Everyone knows that every quarter there's going to be new programs and how what you need to do in order to qualify, because you have some programs that are only open for certain category of sellers, for example, specialists, and really completing them is like, it's something that actually creates a lot of pride in people. So that's what I'm trying to build with the enablement function, is really like get to that stage where it's like, it's a brand that is actually so strong that people are actually excited to get through those programs.
You've kind of kickstarted the enablement function a year ago, correct?
Actually, almost a year ago. That was last year in August. So we're just like a few days short of the first year anniversary. Yeah.
What have you done to try and build this brand, so to speak? And this kind of blends into like what my original kind of opener was here, that part of building a brand is it's synonymous with a culture of compete that's often talked about from folks in compete. So when I say building a brand and culture of compete, they really are kind of like the same thing here, I think.
Yeah, it's really the same thing. So what we've done so far, like first thing, because when I joined CoachHub, there was no enablement functions. So that means that there was no system, no processes, or like no real enablement tool. So really the first step was to actually get the right tools. So we built the structure. So the first tool, the first vendor that we partner with is Seismic, with Seismic and Lessony, to really have our content really in one place. Because beforehand, you can imagine the mess that it used to be, and Lessony as well with a very strong LMS. So this is something I still remember. One of the first time I got to speak at a sales meeting, like the promise actually I signed almost with my blood there, I made to sellers, was that we're going to make sure that we only use like a handful of tools, like as less as possible, but we're going to make sure that everything is in there, and that if they actually have to know one tool, there's just going to be one and not more. And we actually stick to this and really, like every vendor that we're adding, like all the integration, created that integrated ecosystem is like super important. Same with the CRM, etc. We want to make sure that no matter how you access the information, you always get to the right one. That was, I would say, what kept us busy for the first few months, and then was really about delivering the first enablement programs, starting with the very strong sales onboarding. Like we really have the ambition to create the best sales onboarding experience for our SDRs, for our account executives and customer success managers, and then slowly start working towards more continuous enablement. So now we do have a strong product certification that is almost like our flagship program when it comes to the knowledge and the application of knowledge of the sense of coaching, CoachHub approach, the holistic models that we follow, as well as all of the product knowledge. And again, everything has that sales flavor. It's like, how do you reply? What conversations do you have with your clients and with your prospects, right? So those are the steps that we're taking to hopefully build a very strong brand.
I've heard a lot of folks talk about this. Is you mentioned like that onboarding piece, like how do you get people up to speed quickly? How do you teach them to fish so that the moment that they're done with the initial enablement kickoff, that they can at least hold their own in a conversation if something comes up. One of the things that you mentioned to me as well offline when we were talking before is sort of where you mentioned that like your battle cards are going to come into play as well. What are you doing to make these battle cards as usable and applicable as possible? Because there are often many ways that you can create a battle card incorrectly, that it's just not usable or applicable. And for anyone that's just listening to the audio, Anthony is laughing at me as someone that is a seller for over a decade before. He's probably seen a battle card or two. And you know what, Anthony, tell me, without naming names, what is the worst battle card you've ever seen as a seller?
Listen, I'm not honestly. It's not about finger pointing, but it's interesting. Like CoachHub is still a young organization. We've only been out there for 4 years, right? And we're already like a very successful scale up. So when I actually joined a year ago, I was like, hey, you're also in charge of competitive enablement. I was like, fine. Can I have a look at the battle cards? And the battle cards it was just a repository of facts. So for competitor XYZ, there's like, hey, this is what the UX is and how it compares to ours. So I wouldn't say it was the worst that I've seen, but again, going full circle with what I've shared a few minutes ago, like when you're a seller, how do you apply this? How do you leverage that information when you're at a pitch? So the first thing that I've done with my team is like, hey, how do we make this easy to leverage for sellers? So first, we had to make sure that we had the right information there. And once that was done, we're like, hey, yes, we still need to have that repository information, but that is not a battle card. A battle card is giving you the tools and actually the weapons. Sorry for using quite a war-related vocabulary here, but giving you the weapons and ammunition, in order to win. So how do you do this? It's like you have to be clear on why we're superior on some items, why we're actually weaker, why we win in some situations and why we lose sometimes, and what are the main objections that you're going to encounter and how do you handle them. So for me, that's a good battle card, and that's what was missing, and that's what we have now. And obviously we get good feedback because, again, you can leverage it very quickly because the information is already structured in a way that you can directly use it.
You mentioned applicability. So if you have some notes on these are 2 or 3 of the reasons we typically beat competitor X, how do you go? What else would be on a battle card like that to make it that little bit more applicable? Are there some things you're incorporating or planning to incorporate within the card? Is there anything else you're working on to make that even tighter for a sales rep to quickly know what to say?
Yeah, so I would say we're nearly there, but now the way we are going to close the gap even further, a lot of, actually not a lot, one of the principle that we have in the enablement team is that the content that we're creating is modular, right? And this applies as well to the battle cards. So for example, we have, it's actually one of our highest rated workshop during onboarding on competitive enablement. And there we actually have recordings of some of our account executives who are actually handling the one or main objections that they're getting for each of our main competitors. So now we're going to make that content available to people, to sellers already in seat as well. So it's modular, and we are going full circle because we are creating content that is available for everyone, no matter if you're new joiners or if you've been with us for 2 years. Right? One
of the cool things about that, when you showcase real sellers in the wild nailing objection handling, you're giving them a shout out too. You're showcasing them, which is part and parcel of getting people to buy in too. It's not always a take. I think there's so many things that someone can take on when they think of competitive enablement, but these are the foundational blocks, the relationship building that needs to be in play. Winning is a team sport, and it's actually one of our core sales value.
And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's important to recognize, like everything is happening out there, and people who can inspire others, especially new joiners. So for us at CoachHub, this is true for competitive enablement, but it's true overall. For example, even when we're actually closing a deal, everyone that has been involved in the process, from the SDR to the sales engineer or to whoever, actually gets recognized. So this is really something that is important to us, because again, winning is a team sport. But I think it's also important to no matter again your level of seniority in the organization, to actually always feel inspired. And you might have been in the company for 3 years, but that shouldn't stop you from being inspired by peers. It's like, oh, hey, that's how you handle that objection on competitor X. Great. Like, I'm gonna see it by myself if it works, right? I think it's really that culture of sharing, and really it's like, hey, that's what good looks like still with pride.
So your competitive fits under your enablement team, your enablement program, and I've spoken to folks at various levels of company size, and compete can sit in so many different places. The cool thing is talking with you, you're one of the first folks I've spoken to where compete as a whole really sits under the enablement function. And why has that been the case at CoachHub? Why did you look at it and think compete fits into what we're doing as an enablement team rather than it working with under product or reporting the product or reporting the marketing?
Adam, you have no idea how many times I got that question. It usually raises a lot of people are very curious, like, oh, why at CoachHub do you have competitive enablement sitting within the enablement team and not marketing function? I believe this has to do with the fact that first, when it comes to collecting that competitive intelligence, sellers are frontline. And what is great with sellers, no matter what we think or what we say, they will be the most agnostic when it comes to collecting that intel, because they will get information about positioning that potentially is very interesting for a marketing team, about pricing, very important for sales ops teams, as well as product features, so good for a product team, you name it. So because they have in mind, it's like, I want to close deal, I want to make sure that we position our solution in the best way possible, they will collect all of that information and be really agnostic. So I think that's really what we have in mind when when having a competitive enablement sitting with the sales enablement team at CoachHub. If you want to have a successful competitive enablement program, it needs to be a company-wide effort. Of course, there's always going to be one team, no matter if it's an enablement team or marketing team, that is going to push. Because really at CoachHub, we want to empower everyone and not only sellers to really feed us with that intel, right? So yeah, of course, sellers probably provide us with 80% of that intel, but it's everyone's job to actually report back and share it back to us.
So you mentioned, on your enablement, especially onboarding, but just enablement focus and priorities, you're starting with sales first. You mentioned from intel collection, and also I think they often get left out of the conversation here, but customer success teams, I think you mentioned it early as well on your enablement piece, right?
When I talk about sales, I'm thinking, and that's probably because also my past at Google, but for me, sales is basically everyone that is client facing, from your SDR, BDR to the account executive and your customer success manager. So, usually we actually tend to look at sales just mostly AEs and SDRs, but that this is the entire, client facing function, including customer success. Yes.
You've also, when we talked online, you just mentioned a couple of times already, competing as a team sport. This isn't just about revenue facing teams. Although the enablement function is early days, I know that you have a vision for org-wide enablement, org-wide competitive enablement. Can you share sort of what your vision or what your roadmap looks like for how you plan to expand what competitive enablement looks like at CoachHub right now?
What I've shared, probably gonna sound like to many listeners hey, that's fantastic, they cracked the code. No, you can always do better. And for us, really the next step is really to get better at, actually collecting that intel, because we actually realized that there's a lot of people, even within sales, and of course outside of the sales teams, that do have some sort of information, but either they don't know how to share it with us, or simply keep it because they don't feel empowered or don't believe that it's actually important. So that's going to be the next piece, to really empower everyone to actually share. It's like, hey, you have some information. Don't ask, don't wonder. It's like, hey, maybe they have it already. No, information, you share it with us, and then we'll process it and see what we do with it. But that's the missing piece, and that's going to take us to the next level.
In terms of then how you feed that back out and support teams. So obviously you have your customer success, sales, SDRs, the battle cards, the enablement sessions. Do you sort of have like a tiered approach to like who comes next? Like what teams? Like where does marketing start to get competitive content and support? Product teams, the exec, like do you have that mapped out in your mind yet? Or is that sort of a work in progress as it comes?
Well, I think for us, the next step is very clear, and I promise I'm not being paid to say this, but like really we're in the process of onboarding sometime soon with Klue, because like we actually really believe that this is going to help us to close the gap, to have really that common platform that everyone can access, to actually have access to that competitive intelligence and can also share back with us, so we can create that information. Like I think this is really missing, and really have a unified solution to support us with that is going to be key for us. So that's clear, and that's going to be the next stage for us, because there's only so much that you can do with a Google slide presentation or with a Slack message, right? Adam, it's back to what I shared. It's like it's really about teaching how to fish, right? Yeah. So if it's like, hey, that's where all my competitive intelligence is, that's going to be like very, very easy. And yeah.
So, and you're an experienced seller, you're in sales enablement at the mastery team at Google. At least from what we've discussed so far, a lot of it's been about sales enablement. How are the needs different? What do the needs for marketing look like that are different to what a seller needs to know about competition? What's your perspective on that?
There is overlap, right? But probably where other teams, especially marketing or product teams, will be struggling is really to have access to that information, right? So that's where we can help to close the gap. There's some overlap because, for example, you look at marketing. Marketing, most likely they will be interested in like, what is the positioning? What is the messaging? What is their ICP, for example? But that's going to be interesting for sellers as well. But probably the way they're going to leverage that information might be a bit different. But again, I think there's a lot of overlap, but the way the data is going to be used by each team is going to be very different.
I want to share a little anecdote because we haven't talked about this yet. But there's we as a marketing team, we had our QBR last week. Our own competitive enablement manager, Brandon, who sits under the product marketing function here at Klue, he created sort of a competitive war room. And I'm sorry for the war metaphor again, but it was almost a simulation. Half the team was Klue and half the team was one of our biggest competitors. And then each quarter you had to make your marketing decisions. You're like, what are our marketing goals? And we'd share each quarter what we're doing, the competitor and them. He had sort of a model baked into like how that would affect our brand, how that would affect our sales enablement, how that would affect our ACV. And and it would churn out, and then different hiccups would come quarter over quarter. And it really gave this lens into like thinking at a higher, thinking about what we're doing, but also what we're doing in the context of what competitors are doing. I think as someone in marketing, it was one of the first times we've had like a really applicable session like that. It wasn't just like, oh, we've seen competitors post a new blog or we've seen some stuff happen in the sales tool. It really felt like, oh crap, what we do as a marketing team, it relates to what competitors are doing. It relates to how people perceive us. It relates to how when people do come into that first demo, what they think about us, what they like about us, what their perspective on their problem looks like. And so I just wanted to, one, give a shout out to Brandon because he's the best. And two, really think about the enablement, these role playing, these workshops. They're not won't actually just sit with sales. Like there's opportunity to do this with your product teams, with your marketing teams, like teams across the board, understanding the competition and what we can do to differentiate from them, essentially.
You're absolutely right, and thanks for sharing this. I took a few notes, so I might get inspired. So thanks for sharing, Adam. But really, it's really about removing the silos, right? So it's hard, of course. The more people, the more teams you have involved, the harder it is. But at the end of the day, if you're able to really remove those silos, the impact is amazing, right?
One thing as well, in terms of the vision for competitive enablement and vision for how this fits into your enablement function, how did you present that to leadership? Did it come from them to you, like we need to care about compete and it needs to fit under enablement? Or was it something on your end that you're like, I really see this as a great opportunity for compete to roll into enablement? I'd love to get a window into like what that looks like to get that executive support and sponsorship, because you need executive backing on this thing too. If you don't have that sort of sponsorship or support, you're set up to fail, I suppose.
Kind of a funny story, because I didn't really choose, but when I joined CoachHub, I believe competitive enablement was probably one of the first topic that I got to work on. That Yanis, if you listen to this, hi. I didn't really have a choice. Like, hey, we have those battle cards. Like, they're outdated. Like, what can you do? So that's how it happened. And instead of being like, hey, is this really enablement or not? I was like, hey, does it support the success of our sellers? Yes. That's really how we think about the topic. When it'd be like, oh no, it's not in our scope. It's more like, hey, do we enable our sellers to be more successful? Yes. So yes, we should probably work on this, or collaborate with other teams. So like my best answer here is that I'm not even asking myself the question. It's always been here. And for me, it's a no-brainer that it should totally be taken care by our team.
I think the core message I hear from you is that, does it help our sellers win more? Does it help them compete better? Does it help them be more effective in their role? Because at the end of the day, when you talk to your exec team, like that's what they care about. They don't, when you talk about someone, like obviously they do care about like what your tactics are going to be, what your strategies, what the day-to-day is going to look like to a degree, but they really care about that high level, like, okay, what's the point in investing in this from a tech standpoint, from a processes standpoint, from a headcount, time standpoint? Why does it matter to us for a business? And you put it so succinctly there is, well, to start with, it's going to help our sellers perform better, which obviously ties to revenue.
Exactly. And this is really the approach that we're having on so many different projects. I don't want to go, off topic, but for example, our product certification that we built specifically for sellers, we actually had other teams like, hey, we're really interested because we actually need to have the knowledge. Can you roll it out for us? So because we're like, hey, it's going to enable their success as well, we're going to tweak it a bit and make it available to the rest of the company. So really, we're not in a position like, oh my God, that's going to make more work for us. It's not really in our scope. It's really like, do we support the success of other teams and mostly sellers? The answer is yes. So absolutely, we're gonna work on this.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time because I think you need to get an ice pack or two on your head to cool down here.
I'm still okay. I'm like I can feel the wind picking up. So
you're putting on a brave face. I can't tell if you're getting really heated over this conversation or because it's 42 degrees outside. Listening to you speak, you have this like energy to learn, to experiment, to test. There's this strategic mindset as well. When I hear you talk, it's like there's always a reason to some of the things you're doing or the teams you're supporting. And I love that thinking. And so when it comes to competitive enablement specifically, how are you going to measure the success of this? Because this is something I've talked about on a couple of different podcasts. People ask me this all the time about like, because you need to prove out the value. Like sometimes you don't always have like the executive support, or maybe 2 quarters in, they like the idea of competitive enablement, but now they're like, well, what's it actually done for me lately? Our sales are down. Like, so in terms of how you're going to measure the success of competitive enablement, have you got some KPIs, metrics in mind?
The way we actually measure the impact of our programs is actually like a 3-tier approach. The first one is, pretty basic, the CSAT, right? Our setters satisfied with that enablement program. And we actually do have quite a high objective. We have an objective to have a 4.5 out of 5, which is like, at this stage, it's not even best in class. It's like really, really high. Roughly for most of our programs, we are around 4.4, 4.5. So like very strong, right? Mm-hmm. Then the second tier would be to measure the confidence lift. Like, do our setters feel more confident after going through one of our program, competitive enablement or other enablement program? For this, we have an objective of 25%. In the learning and development or enablement industry, 25% is considered best in class.
Does that mean like 25%, like you came in feeling X amount of confidence and then after the session you felt 25% more? Is that like a 20% 25% delta you mentioned?
Exactly, Adam. That's the delta. And for our competitive enablement, we are at 28% confidence lift. So we have really good results. And then the last tier, that's the one that's harder to crack, is what is the impact of business? Are we closing more deals? When we look at our win-loss analysis, are we winning more against more competitors, etc.? So that's how we measure the success. It's like really that 3-tier. Obviously, it's harder to measure when it comes to business impact because there's so many other other things, other factors that can have an impact. But that's how we measure the success of competitive enablement.
What I love about this tiered approach, this foundation, again, it's similar to what Brandon, our compete manager, has talked about on how he structures it, is having that qualitative feedback that also you're quantifying too with these sort of like versions of NPS score and confidence scores. Is now you can tell a more layered story though too. Now you have this sort of wealth of like qualitative information. You can paint a more vivid picture about how compete is actually impacting that. Like we can't attribute this totally to this win rate spike totally to competitive enablement because, hey, we just dropped a killer product feature that is blowing our competition out the water, potentially. But look what our sellers are saying. Look at the score rates. Look at this 25% delta. Like that stuff all feeds in to being able to tie it to that business, those business metrics, which I love to hear. And my producer's giving me the wrap it up sign. I can tell.
I feel like we could talk for hours, on competitive enablement and especially for sales, right? So.
I think we can. I think we will have to do it in the future. And the thing here as well is your program is very early days, the enablement function, and it's just incredible to see the traction you've come with and the foundation you're laying up for success. So there's no doubt that we're going to be getting you back on the show in the future to see what went down. Anthony, thank you so much for that. Where can people, if people have questions for you, wanna reach out, wanna contact you, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm really responsive. So yeah, any question, any comments, just like slide to my DM. That's how you say these days, right? Slide to my DM. I don't know if that applies to LinkedIn. God, I hope my partner is not going to listen to that podcast. That was terrible. Sorry.
We're going to keep that bit in. Ben, we've got our cold open for the episode. You can slide into Anthony's DMs in a professional manner.
Please.
On LinkedIn. Strictly professional. Anthony, thank you so much. This was awesome. And we'll catch everyone next week.
My pleasure. Thanks, Adam.